Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. We're glad to have you back for AIA Colorado's Virtual Connect session. We've got a good one lined up today, but before we get there, just some opening announcements. This week, our Virtual Connects have a theme of sustainability to help us celebrate the opening of our award submissions, particularly our design awards, as we now have a sustainability category available for submissions. We'll host an information session on submitting for a Designer Honor Award this Friday, May 8th at noon. And you can learn more about it starting now on our website. You'll get one HSW credit for attending today's session. You'll need to have RSVP'd online via the calendar event for the session today. See the link in the chat function if you haven't already RSVP'd, and please stay through to the end to ensure you receive credit today. We also have the ability to use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists. That's at the bottom of your Zoom bar, and we will get to those at the end. So we have today a focus on the 2030 commitment and 3 national leaders in advancing this movement across the country and around the world. I'll start with Rachel. Rachel Bannon-Godfrey is an associate AIA member, lead AP, well AP, and a Fitwel ambassador. She's the global sustainability discipline leader for Stantec, leading the practice of sustainability, resiliency, and energy management strategies. Her experience in the design industry spans close to 20 years across 3 continents and focuses on the engineering and design of high-performance, net zero buildings and communities. Rachel's passion for multidisciplinary engagement and expanding the conventional boundaries of sustainability includes several appointments to municipal and industry working groups, including the City of Denver's Mayor Sustainability Advisory Council, the AIA 2030 Commitment Working Group, and the ICC Sustainability Energy High Performance Code Action Committee. Hello, Rachel, and thank you for joining us today. Next, we have Heather Gayle Holdridge. Heather's an associate AIA member, a lead fellow, and is the sustainability director at Flato Architects, a firm that has gained national recognition for architecture that successfully responds to its particular place while seamlessly integrating with the natural environment. Leveraging her background in mechanical engineering, Heather directs all Lake Flato project teams in establishing achievable sustainability goals. She devises strategies and establishes methods and systems to realize those goals under programs such as LEAD, the 2030 Challenge, and the Living Building Challenge. Heather works closely with design teams to evaluate appropriate passive systems and performs energy modeling throughout the design process. Heather's projects have included the Engineered Biosystems Building at Georgia Tech, the Austin Central Library, and the Livestrong Foundation facility. She has a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and a Master of Business Administration from UT San Antonio. Hello, Heather. And finally, we have Nathan Kipnis, FAIA, lead BD and C. Nathan is a fellow of the AIA and principal at Kipnis Architecture and Planning, based in Evanston, Illinois, and Boulder, Colorado. CAP was recently named one of the top 25 environmental architectural firms in the United States. He was awarded the 2019 Emerald Award from the Illinois Green Alliance. Mr. Kipnis was a founding member of the AIA's 2030 Commitment Working Group in 2009. He recently completed a 2-year term as the group's national chair. He also serves on the AIA Sustainable Leadership Group. He was a design and technology consultant for the 2017 House by Northwestern Solar Decathlon entry. And he's also the founder of Next House Alliance, a new premium design build concept to provide net zero, sustainable, resilient, and healthy homes. Mr. Kipnis received his Master of Architecture with an emphasis in energy conscious design from Arizona State University and his Bachelor of Environmental Design from the University of Colorado at Boulder. He's been strongly focused on energy efficient architectural design since attending college and designed his first solar home in Boulder in 1983 when he was 21 years old. Welcome, Nate.
Mike.
And without further ado, and with great anticipation, it's my pleasure to turn it over to these 3 panelists.
All right. And, well, thank you, Mike. So I just want to start with a discussion about the IPCC report that was done 2 years ago. And it really laid out what we're up against and why we need to design buildings and communities that really reduce and going towards eliminating CO2. And if you have not had a chance to look at this report, I would strongly recommend you do. at least look at the executive summary, which is not a short one, but it is loaded with some really good information. I want to also talk about a really important vote that the AIA had at last year's AIA National Convention in Las Vegas. They had a resolution on climate change, and it was passed by an enormous margin. 93% voted yes. I'm not quite sure why anyone would vote no on this, but it was still pretty overwhelming. And basically, the AIA has really set their focus now on net zero carbon practice as the accepted way to design. And they're prioritizing this to support urgent climate action as a health, safety, and welfare issue to exponentially accelerate the decarbonization of buildings and the built environment. There is a lot that is behind this move. They were talking of originally moving this from sustainability of about 6% of their national budget to 60%. Not quite sure where it's going to fall out, but the thought is that this is an exponential, order of magnitude shift, and really, really excited by this. So that resolution was passed last year. It was ratified by the board not long thereafter. And then a task force was formed to start on a climate action plan. And that climate action plan is getting ready to be released to the public now. A lot of great thought going into that. The other thing that's a big change is typically there's the COAT Top 10 awards, and those are for like the highest performing firms. I know Heather's firm, Flato, has done amazingly well with this. And when you sign on to that, there's these 10 different categories. The AIA has just said, you know what, this is now the framework for design excellence. We're not going to just have this for just these projects that are going for the COAT Top 10. And so that is including integration, equitable communities, ecology, design for water, designing for economy, energy is the obvious one, wellness, resources, change, and discovery. And they're going to phase these in different parts over the years. So the first ones are energy, equitable communities, and economy. And that'll just keep getting broadened out as time goes on. And so this is something that the AIA is going to release. This is one of their marketing thoughts on how to do this. So one site, countless challenges, a looming deadline, 7.5 billion climates. This is the ultimate design project. This is why we're here. I get goosebumps just reading this stuff. It's really great. It's time to show what design can do. It's time for the biggest design organization in the world to take on the biggest design problem in the world. And from this moment forward, AIA and its members dedicate ourselves to designing a healthy, sustainable, and equitable world together. And so, like I said, they are really, really laser focused on this. I'm just really impressed with the AIA for doing this, and it's obviously what we need right now. The AIA 2030 commitment came about from the 2030 challenge that Ed Mazzaria started back, I think, in 2006. So the AIA took it on in 2008, and I joined on in 2009 when they started trying to figure this out. And the reason being, Mazzaria did some research, which now is very obvious, but back then it was interesting to see that buildings are the majority of CO2 emissions from building operations and embodied carbon. And so the thought was that firms should start joining on and tracking their usage. And the thought is that we're not expecting to just focus on a single project. Every firm has got some great project that is really performing superbly. The idea is to make this a firm-wide goal and really bring it into the firm culture, and not just assign it to the one person that really knows this stuff, but get the whole office up and running on this. And that by doing this, we can, if we take that 40% and we can get that to net zero, that can help us stay below that infamous 2%, 2 degrees Celsius number. This is a similar chart that Architecture 2030 put out. They have some really great graphics, but basically buildings, in fact, are in this current one, 45% of the total energy use and 40% of the world's electricity from coal is what's really kicking climate change around. So what is the 2030 commitment? So again, this is a reporting tool. It's for your portfolio. It is not a certification program. It's not like LEED or Passive House or something like that. We just are going to aggregate the firm's projects, and then you can see where you're at. And that's really the important thing, is to start getting feedback on how you're doing. Kind of like driving a hybrid, and you see, you see the dashboard, and you're able to make adjustments based on that. So that's really the key thing about the 2030 commitment. And again, it's also to get this into the firm culture, not just to highlight a single high-performing project or two. So here's the targets. And when this was started in 10, the goal, well, prior to that, in 09, it was 50%. And every 5 years, it goes down 10% until we get to carbon neutral by 2030. And so that's a reduction in fossil fuel consumption, bringing on off-site renewables, and keep dropping that fossil fuel consumption. And so now, this thing says, yeah, this is our current one at 2015, but we just rolled the odometer over, and now we're into the 80% range. And it is starting to get very interesting. There are firms that have accomplished this for their entire portfolio. This is not an easy task. When you sign on, it is not intended that you hit this target immediately. That is not the goal. The goal, well, that is the goal, but the reality is you're going to work your way up to that. So don't be discouraged, to not even sign on. Don't be discouraged when you start. You just have to start tracking, see how you're doing, make adjustments, and keep moving forward. So there's several parts to the 2030 commitment. The first one is a letter of commitment that you sign to the AIA. And again, there is no green police that's going to do anything bad if you can't hit this. So don't get that mixed up. It's a commitment, meaning that you're committing your firm to going after these goals and targets. The second thing is a sustainability action plan. And that needs to be looked at periodically. But basically what that is what are you doing internally? What are some goals you're setting? So that can be things in the office, like, hey, telecommuting, like we're all doing now, or getting efficient lighting, efficient appliances, or whatever into the office. But also, what are some targets? Like, hey, we want to do a LEED Gold project, or 2 of them this year, or we want to, start looking at Passive House, or whatever it is, whatever's appropriate for your firm. And then the third thing is to endeavor to meet the targets for the 2030 commitment that are current at that time, and then report within the first year to the DDX. So this is really important. What we don't want to do is have a bunch of firms sign on and think they're done and not do anything. You have to actually start engaging and start reporting. And then, as I mentioned, you want to reevaluate your sustainability action plan every 3 years and kind of see where you're at and where you can start to move forward with that. There's a whole bunch of benefits that come with joining the commitment. One is getting an understanding of a project's EUI and doing that throughout the entire process. So that's, people don't necessarily understand what an EUI number is, an energy use intensity. We're going to talk about that in a little bit in some more detail. But it's really important to get a handle on that, and then to try and move that. That is the main metric of the commitment, along with a lighting power density number. This also promotes early and often energy analysis, so that gets you to be able to make modifications to your design really early, when it's really inexpensive or at zero cost to make these modifications. And you might see that by the shape or orientation of your building, that has an enormous impact, and you can relay that to the client and to your energy consultants and your mechanical consultants. Improve your firm's energy literacy. So getting everyone in the firm to understand this stuff. Not just these people kind of hidden in the corner that are doing energy analysis and energy design. It'll make your firm more marketable to be able to promote this. I think there's nothing but good things that can come from it. And it's starting to be required on many award submittals and RFPs. And so, especially on larger projects, But in Chicago, where we're based, we now have the main awards that you need to be a signatory to the 2030 commitment. And I think next year we're going to have it where you need to start reporting your EUI numbers as part of that. So this is going to become pretty common around the country. There's a whole series of myths that are associated with the 2030 commitment. And one of them is it takes too much time to do this. And it's really not that big a deal. If you're doing a project, what we hope is that you're energy modeling in-house. But if you're not and you have an energy consultant, they're going to be giving you that EUI number. We hope they give it to you at multiple times and early in the process, but you're going to have that. So what you're doing is you're inputting the data, you're tracking your projects into the design data exchange, the DDX. And so we figure it takes about 30 minutes per project or less to put that info in. It takes too many resources. It does not. The program is free, and we actually provide mentorship for every new signatory. I may have poor performing projects in my portfolio. Welcome to the crowd. Everyone's got them. It's just a fact of life. You're going to have a range of projects, and I wouldn't worry about it. And also, the program is completely anonymous. So you don't need to worry that you're going to get EUI shamed or anything like that. You just, again, it's a learning thing for you to learn. Whatever you want to put out to the public is great, but don't worry about anyone else tracking that. I'll have to reach the 2030 commitment target. Like I said, progress is much more important than meeting that target, especially early on as you're joining. It will take time to figure this out. It will take many cycles, but you don't start that process until you start. So if you can start signing on, you can start tracking, you can start making progress towards the target, and you'll start learning what it is that influences the EUI numbers. Kind of like playing a video game, except it's real world. The project must be complete. So that's not exactly correct. There's a whole bunch of ways to enter the data as you go along. So you can enter it at different points in the process, and then you can close it out at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Great. So Nate set this up well. Probably one of the greatest myths or barriers to this program is kind of a fear or hesitation to take on energy modeling. But in reality, this is at the very heart of the program. In order for us to be energy literate and understand the impacts of our designs on energy use, we need to have a proficiency with some of these tools. And the good news is that there are now many, many tools available, many of them that are set up specifically for our profession and our backgrounds and expertise. So you don't have to be a mechanical engineer or a full-time energy modeler to use them. And the even better news is that you don't have to do these calculations by hand anymore. So what Nate was showing on the previous slide was old school, how we used to do energy calculations, and those have now gotten much, much simpler. This spreadsheet is another example of kind of a more manual, tedious process that we used to all go through. So Nate, you can move to the next slide. So now there are, like I said, many different tools that are available now. Our firm has experimented with many of them, and in my opinion, each one kind of has its own strength that is suited for a particular design discussion. But you can model decisions that are really in the architect's court. It's building massing, it's envelope decisions. So again, it doesn't always have to get into mechanical systems deeply, because we know that architects have a profound impact on the energy use of our designs. And being able to quantify these metrics is very important. This is a screenshot from one of the most recent annual reports from the 2030 commitment program. So each firm can produce these metrics. What were the cost savings? What were the metric tons of greenhouse gases saved? And whenever you multiply that across all of the firms that are participating in this program, it becomes very significant. So again, as Nate talked about when he was describing the 2030 Challenge program, we know that buildings have a big impact on the environment, and we can actually quantify the positive impacts that we're all having through this program. Okay, I think, sorry, we're moving. Thank you. So I wanted to point out this resource. So AIA has many, many resources for architects to learn how to integrate energy modeling into their practices. So the example that's showing on the screen right now is a webinar. There are many AIAU webinars that are focused just on energy modeling or the 2030 program, so definitely check those out. And there's also, once you join the 2030 commitment program, you'll have access to a Basecamp site where you can see recordings of different webinars from other signatory firms that are talking about different ways that they are reporting their progress and transforming their practice to meet the targets. And many years ago, the AIA released an energy modeling design guide, a really helpful resource so that architects can learn how to simulate building performance. And there has recently been an update to that guide. So definitely check that out. It's a free resource, really great PDF report that talks about all of the different energy modeling tools and how to efficiently use them in your design practice. So what is the benefit of using these energy modeling tools? It helps you prioritize what design decisions you can make that can drive down energy the most. You'll find that the solutions that are most impactful vary by building type, they vary by climate. So using these tools help you come up with the tailored solutions to your project that will have the most impact so that you can really focus on those that are low cost, high impact, instead of spinning your wheels on decisions that may not drive down energy use most significantly. And you'll be able to chart out results like this. You can use an iterative process to try a lot of different energy conservation measures to see which ones make the most impact. And again, as architects, we are best positioned to look at those strategies that have the greatest reductions at the lowest cost, those that have to do with building shape, orientation, envelope design, before we start looking to mechanical active systems that use energy, and most importantly, before we start looking at renewables for producing energy on site. So this is showing all of the different benchmarks that exist for different building types. This is a very important piece of energy literacy, understanding what the average energy consumption is for various building types so that you understand what an acceptable energy use intensity would be. So this is showing the latest, it's called CBEX data, and that stands for Commercial Buildings Energy Consumption Survey. It's a survey that's administered by the EPA's Energy Information Administration. So getting familiar with these benchmarks and understanding how you can reduce them. And you know, for a long time, we understood that some of the most energy intensive programs were restaurants, food service, those types of program types. But it's been kind of interesting to see with the growth of the cannabis industry in the U.S. I think it just completely blows those project types out of the water. So again, understanding which program types are most energy intensive so that you can address those programs in a really specific way. So the DDX reporting tool is where you enter your data for each project at the end of each year, and ideally you're doing it more than just once per year. You're doing it throughout the year, but you're simply using the data outputs from those energy modeling tools to enter this data. And as Nate said, if you're using these tools efficiently throughout the design process, it's a pretty quick process to enter this data into the DDX. And once you've entered all of your projects for a reporting year, you get these really great dashboard graphics that show your results across your portfolio. So you can understand on average how much you've reduced energy consumption by, how much you're energy modeling and collecting post-occupancy energy data. So these are really great summary reports to share with your firm and your clients. And this is one of my favorite parts of the DDX. It's the research tab where you can actually go in and sort all of the different project data entry points, not just for your own firm, but for all firms participating in the program. And by the way, this is all kept anonymous. So when you're seeing another firm's project data, you can't tell which firm it is, but you can still see the EUI data, what climate zone it's located in, the approximate square footage of it. This is a way for you just to understand, how are other lab buildings in this climate performing so that you can set an aggressive yet achievable EUI for a new design project that you're working on. It's worth noting that the DDX has been in place for many years now. I think most of us have been pretty familiar with, the way the graphic user interface. It's going through a pretty significant update this year. So for those of you that are using it, you'll see that it'll look quite different in a few months, but it's significantly improved. I think it'll be much more user-friendly, and you'll see a few new inputs that are related to carbon and really transitioning the program from looking at just operational energy to all aspects of carbon in building. So be on the lookout for that.
I should point out that, the DDX reporting got delayed this year. So that's June 25th?
I think it's July 15th.
July 15th, correct. So the DDX was going to be released and it's been delayed until that. So you're not going to be able to use this for this year.
Great, thanks, Heather. Thanks, Nate. So every year there is a report that is produced based on that year's reporting, and it breaks down. It just looks at the data, and it provides a really nice snapshot of the industry, and it's a really helpful report to read, not only for your own information, but also if you need some more material in which to bring to your leadership, if you're trying to make a case for signing on to 2030, or if you want to use it for internal education or anything like that. So I highly recommend that folks look at the report, and I believe it's called By the Numbers. Is that right, Nate?
Yes.
Yeah, 2030 By the Numbers. So what is it telling us? So we've got a few slides here that take some of the data points from the report. So first of all, here you can see the number of signatories by size, firm size. And you can see that there's a good spread across all different firm sizes. However, what this is telling us is, first of all, this is not all the firms in the US. Right? There are more than the number shown here of small practitioners. There are many, many more. And it's also telling us that nearly every large firm is a signatory, because there aren't that many of the really big firms in the US either. So it gives a good snapshot of what size of firm has signed up. And obviously each size of firm has different different access to resources, different levels of accountability, different project types, and so on. So, but this just gives a really good snapshot and tells us that for the smaller firm sizes, we need more signatories because they do cover a significant portion of the market. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So as you can see from this graph, the total number of signatories is growing every year. And just like with the previous one, whilst this is a good number, it's steadily increasing. The outreach that 2030 Group is doing is helping, and the profession is engaged and really getting on board. But this is not all the firms in the US. And this morning I tried to Google how many architecture firms are there in the United States, and the numbers I saw were all over the map, but they were all in the tens of thousands. And here we have like 760 firms that are signatories. So that's a problem. And the other thing is that there's an ambition gap, which means there's a big disconnect between the number of firms that have signed on, they've made that commitment, they've got that letter of intent, but they're not reporting. So it's one thing to sign on, it's another thing to use it as a mechanism for really looking at your portfolio and improving your portfolio every year and reporting your data. And as Nate and Heather mentioned a number of times, it is anonymous, but by uploading the data from your firm, you're helping us all. Because let's say somebody has a project of a particular size or a particular type and wants to use that scatter plot that Heather showed, and being able to go on and see what other projects of this particular size or type, where does that % energy savings reduction lie, and use that as a benchmark. It's very helpful. So reporting helps not only your own firm, but all of us as a result as well. So
the 760 firms, though, as Rachel mentioned, a lot of those are enormous firms. So the square footage, which you'll see in a minute, it's not that, oh my God, there's only 760 out of 20,000 firms. That's one thought, but the other thought is how many buildings, how much square footage. So it's not exactly as it feels on this slide.
Yeah, and really good point, because if we cross-reference that to the slide that showed the firm size, if we do have so many medium and large firms that have signed up and are reporting, you're absolutely right. That covers a significant percentage of the gross square footage that we're all responsible for every year. So in this slide, you can see the square foot reported. Again, it's increasing every year, more than 3 billion gross square feet, which is more than a third of the gross square footage that comes online every year in the built environment. So this is great. And assuming that all of those firms that are reporting are incrementally increasing the energy savings that they're seeing in their projects each year, then as a profession, we are seeing an impact. We are decreasing the impact that we're having on the built environment on an annual basis. And this is really good news for the industry and just for all of us in general. Next slide, please. There you can see that data point illustrated with a crane, just in case we needed that visual. Just like the news reporter who stands outside in a storm, you've got the crane there. So again, like I said, this is a significant square footage of the market each year. Great, thank you. So there's also a wide variety of progress of different building types. So this slide is showing the percentage PEUI savings per building type, and how each of them are moving towards that 2030 goal. So some building types are challenged by things like high process loads, or like healthcare or labs, different unique occupancies. So those are some challenges, but then there's some opportunities as well. So for example, we were talking yesterday when we were getting ready for this presentation that higher education is seeing a lot of commitments coming down by universities saying we want all our buildings to be LEED Gold, for example, or we want all of our buildings to achieve a certain percentage of energy savings. So there are some institutional-wide frameworks and commitments that are really helping the built environment as a whole move towards the 2030 goal.
And the thing that this chart really shows is you have to model this. You cannot just not model it and go by the code equivalent. You see the big difference between all of these when they're modeled. And that's what we're trying to tell you. Please model them.
Yep, absolutely. You can also see down at the bottom there, single family homes have actually hit their annual 2030 target as in general as a building type. And I know for us here in Colorado, we are seeing a huge increase in new housing developments that are sold already net zero or net zero ready, which is really a good thing. And so as a market type, while single family homes tend to be sometimes maligned when built on mass, we are seeing a huge improvement in that building type. And Nate has a portfolio of amazing single family homes as well. So we're seeing that across the board. Next slide, please. Great. So from this graph, we can see that as an industry, we are not on track to meet our 2030 goals if we continue along the trajectory that's shown right now. However, we can also see that there's an opportunity to achieve that goal if we accelerate our progress. So, we can still get there. And this is a kind of a call to action for us all to make these internal goals that are ambitious. We're not going to get there by incrementalism. We can't just make these small steps each year. We're in the last decade before 2030. So hopefully each of you on the call today will be inspired to make these big, ambitious internal goals to get there and to really help. Whilst we're all sitting at home flattening the curve, we want to do the opposite for professionally and just increase the ramp of that curve up to meeting the 2030 target. And the thing about these big leaps is that they can be business development opportunities. The market for net zero buildings has grown. Not as fast as we all hoped, but it is steadily increasing in size and value, not only in the single family home market as we see, driving around these new these housing developments, but also increasingly, I'm sure many of you on the call have received questions or inquiries or interest from more clients about net zero and what does that mean than we have in the past. So the market is there. It's time to set these ambitious goals, and we use it for internal education about energy literacy that Heather was talking about, but then also as as an opportunity for us all to move the industry that way. Next slide, please. So you can see from this graph that for most firms, the kind of average savings of our projects are in the 40 to 60% range. There's a number of factors that influence if this is a cap that some firms are seeing. For example, climate zones, right? It's much harder to build a net zero energy building in Gunnison than it would be in San Diego. Building type, right? Healthcare and labs, a lot of process loads that you can only reduce so much. But let's not use that as an excuse. So for example, Heather's firm, like Flato, you do a lot of labs or and healthcare and so on, and projects that do have process loads. And we have seen net zero projects. You know, Colorado is a leader in net zero energy projects, so it is possible. We're just trying to think about, well, you know, why is it that most firms are within that range and potentially not further. There's also, you know, on-site renewables and so on, and the cost of those. So there is a way to move beyond that 40% savings. There's a way to hit these targets. We do see a lot of firms who have won repetitive COAT awards and are meeting their 2030 targets, and they do all different building types, all different climate zones. It is possible, and the key, as Nate and Heather have said all along, is energy modeling. Next slide.
So one thing to keep in mind, these percents are based on a 2003 baseline.
Yeah, that is a really good point. That is not against today's code. That is against a much older code. So the key to that is energy modeling. As you can see here, if you take one thing away from this presentation, it's that energy modeling is critical to high performance building. Over and over again, it's resulted in greater energy savings. So I know it's a cliche, but you know, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And if you are able to do energy modeling on a project, this will result in a better project. Great, Heather. Oh, last one. All right. So as I said before, we're now in the 10-year countdown, and I know that, you know, due to the coronavirus and there's a lot of stuff has happened so far. And we're only in May. This year it seemed like a blur, and it probably will continue to be a blur. But we can't lose a whole year of progress to getting to 2030, because that would be 10% of the time we have left. So you know, we really do have to double down on our efforts to meet that goal by 2030. One thing that the working group has seen is really key to helping communities, architecture communities, reach their goals is the setting up of local COAT or 2030 groups for, you know, just kind of that mutual support and resources and knowledge management, knowledge sharing. And so Nate, I wonder if you could talk about some of the groups that or Heather, that you've come across that are shown here on the map.
So the red ones are where there's AIA 2030 roundtables. And so these are where most of the signatories are. And I know Colorado, I know Denver had this, and it kind of went away a few years ago. Wherever we get these groups, there are just an amazing amount. Chicago has 120 signatories out of the 760, and half of them came from last year, where there's been an enormous push in Chicago because of this. Wherever we get these groups, and again, each of these areas with the red is where most of them are. Additionally, there are non-AIA groups. They're like little huddles or whatever you want to call them, where people just get together, and the Bay Area has a great one that has been in operation for quite a while and has generated a lot of help. So that's like meeting up, checking your ego at the door and helping each other and trying to figure out how to improve your performance and do better. So we're very excited. There's a big outreach now to set up these local chapters. And we really want to encourage that, and we want Denver to do it again.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that, San Antonio, where I'm located, had a similar situation where we kind of had a roundtable early on, and it's fallen off. But AIA National also contributes some resources. They'll give you a report of all of the firms in your region so that you can see specifically how your region's firms or projects are performing. So I think having that kind of data analytics support is really helpful as you're getting together with local firms to brainstorm on how you can do better.
So this poster on the right is from Philadelphia, and they just made this big effort to get this going. And they have, you know, whatever it is, 6 presentations that break down the process. They're 1-hour presentations. They're at different locations, you know, kind of informal, but lots of great information. So this is a really good model. And there's a lot of subcommittees at the national level. I'm on a subcommittee for components for outreach like this. So we're trying to fire up as many around the country as we can.
Yeah, and since we last had the group that was active here in Denver, there's been a lot of change here in the Denver Boulder area with the Green Building Ordinance, Denver's new Green Code, Boulder continuing to increase their energy code. So it's a really good time. We have a lot of kind of mandated reasons to improve the energy efficiency of Denver's portfolio as a whole. So it's a really good time to get together and do that knowledge sharing and really use the countdown to 2030 as a catalyst for that.
Great. So I'll just talk a little bit about Lake Flato's perspective on the 2030 commitment program. And we represent, by most people's measure, a mid-sized firm. So we're about 110 people. Most of us are in San Antonio, Texas. But we do have a small office now in Austin, Texas, about 80 miles north of here. So I think that Austin office makes up about 15 of us. And again, the balance are all together in San Antonio. So you can go to the next slide, Nate. We work on a pretty wide diversity of project types, everything from single family, custom residential to large master plans, development, urban and build type projects. We do K through 12 schools, higher ed. So again, broad diversity of project types, and we work all over the country. So we're working in almost every climate zone in the US. So just to talk a little bit about how the 2030 commitment program has impacted our practice, I think EUI and energy metrics has really become a prominent way in how we talk about our work. Showing EUI and other performance metrics has become the way that we describe our projects. And we're using that language for a much more honest design narrative. And I think what's really important is that we're using that both in internal design reviews and activities like you're seeing on the photo on the left, but we're also using it in our external marketing materials as well. And then I think a really interesting example of how this has permeated our work, we're going through an office renovation right now, and you're seeing an image of an early kind of kickoff charrette where we were talking about the design ideas and goals that we wanted to reach in this renovation. And I think really connecting our identity to our work was important. So aspirations like having a net zero and living building pedal certified project became a very important part of that discussion. I think setting goals early has also been a major impact of this program. So we have a process that was inspired by the 2030 challenge and the COAT Top 10, where we set EUI targets and sustainability goals early in the process. And then we track them throughout design and construction and post-occupancy. And I think the results are very good. As Nate said, we've won about 8 COAT Top 10 projects since we instituted this process. So I think we can show that this process has led us to a pretty true example of design excellence in our work. And then the last example that I wanted to share is I think another really positive impact of this program on our practice has been an increased focus on post-occupancy evaluation, because energy modeling has really developed a thirst in our designers to actually understand the real performance of our buildings and the impact on user behavior. So it's helped us become a better, not just better and more accurate energy models, but it's helped us become conversant in areas that influence energy but weren't traditionally considered part of our scope. Things like pumps and automation systems, we now have developed some real expertise around.
So I'm going to talk about my firm. You saw how many people Heather had around the lake. We can all fit in the little minivan. So, when you can see the holiday card and everyone can sign it very clearly and read it, that's the size of our firm. We're 5 people. Again, we're in Evanston, and now we, as of the first of the year, we're in Boulder. So we primarily do single family residential, detached single family, about 80%, but we also do a range of other stuff. Even occasionally some airport facility work, which for us is really a big deal, but that's because we're a smaller firm. And because we focus on single family, I know what works in our climate. We're now starting to do some work in Colorado and also in Scotland, surprisingly. So it's fun to try and figure out these different climates and how they impact the design. These are some of the projects we've done, a couple LEED Platinum homes and some other high performance homes. Generally, these are all in the Chicago area. The one on the upper left is in Wisconsin. So how do we work? Well, this is a picture on the right. This is where I'm sitting right now. There are no walls, okay? So, you know, when someone says something, I hear it, not like in offices where there's locations all over the world or, you know, lots of closed off rooms. So nothing is hidden from anyone in the office. And the guy that does our energy modeling, you know, I walk by his desk 20 times a day, and I walk by everyone's desk. So the open office encourages that collaboration. Everyone is knowledgeable on energy modeling. Anyone who's in the firm knows what they're getting into with me. So it's pretty straightforward with the firm culture. This is a house I'm just going to show you real quick. This is our highest performing homes, which is kind of wild when you look at this thing. 71% better than baseline. It relied on really great perimeter insulation and how tight the house was, along with some renewables. And then what there wasn't on site, we're getting from certified green power. It's pre-wired for battery backup. All the windows have their solar heat gain coefficient based on the orientation, just simple things like that. And I swear that's one of the best ones. One of the cheapest things to do is to get your window orientation figured out and get your solar heat gain coefficient to work with that. Costs nothing to do that. The other thing we're doing with all these homes, or at least a good chunk of them, is making them all electric. So if we want to decarbonize, that's a great way to do it. And that means having the discussion about induction cooktop. That is the #1 eye roller when we bring it up. And we actually take people to an executive chef that cooks on induction, and usually that solves it. We also have air source hybrid water heater, and same thing with a dryer. And then for the mechanical system, it's an air source heat pump. We like the air source as opposed to ground source, as opposed to geothermal, but in some climates in Colorado, I know it makes a lot of sense there. Smart thermostats, some simple stuff. And then also the way the perimeter is set up. So we have exterior insulation along with, which is a rigid with a low global warming potential. And then on the interior, it's a fluffy insulation in the studs. So that's either cellulose or rock wool. It's a rain screen system. This is shown as a cement fiberboard system for that. And then we use closed cell foam only on cathedral ceilings. Otherwise, we do that system I just described. And so this is our year-over-year chart. And when you're a small firm, you're like a yo-yo. So it just depends on what projects we have. One year we beat the target, that was surprising, and then we crashed the next year. It just, you know, we get an industrial project and bam, we're underwater. When you're a big firm, and I'll use the analogy for General Motors, when they have the little Volt and Bolt cars, it does nothing to their average fleet average. But if it's a small car company, it'll have a huge impact. So that's what you're seeing with this. But it's interesting, and I don't care that it goes up and down. I think that's instructive to us more than anything. So I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Great, thanks, Nate. And Heather, as you're showing your slides and you mentioned you're renovating your office, my first thought was, I think we're all going to be renovating our office once we're allowed to come back in with social distancing. So anyway, good luck. Looking forward to seeing what it looks like. Next slide, please, Nate. So as I mentioned, I work with Stantec, and up until 3 years ago, we were R&L, which I'm sure many of you on the call remember. And now we're part of a much bigger family. We're still the same people. We still do, you know, many of the same projects, but we've kind of feel like we were kids with keys to the candy store now. We're spread out, so Stantec spread out all over the world, as you can see here. Huge number of employees. As they say, the sun never sets on a Stantec office, and many of us are on calls almost 24/7, which makes scheduling Skype calls interesting. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as Nate mentioned, a part of the 2030 commitment is a sustainability action plan. And we actually have a team dedicated to doing an annual sustainability report. And they collect information about the sustainability impact of our operations, our offices, and our projects year round. The report is due each, I think it's due each May, and literally as soon as that report is collected, the next, well, they take a few days off because it's a big push, but the next week they're back into starting to collecting all that data again for the following year. We're a publicly traded company, so this is something our investors look at and they read, and so we go into a lot of detail with our sustainability reporting. Next slide, please. So as a big company, we do have people spread all over and a lot of different skills and expertise. And I will say that of that 22,000 people, just over 5,000 are in buildings. So as you can see here, we've got a number of projects in the different rating systems around the world. It's really interesting to compare the how sustainability is defined and the different kind of measures of success in the different continents, the different countries. I know many of you on this call also work in other countries as well. And so you've probably seen that too. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of how we're defining sustainability or how we approach it at Stantec. So obviously we're signatories to 2030 commitment. We also are doing a lot of work around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because that's a really nice way of tying together all of the sectors that Stantec works in, not just buildings. And the kind of the point, the Venn diagram where they overlap is around, you can see these 3 goals here. There's about 5 sustainable development goals that we are actively tracking and that we have a direct impact on, about another 4 that we indirectly have an impact on, and we track those. We've set up dashboards and so on to track how we are meeting the sustainable development goals. And for these 3 here, affordable and clean energy. So you can imagine that looks like, you know, what percentage of our projects are run by clean energy, whether that's on-site renewables on a buildings project or the work that our power group does. Sustainable cities and communities. So you know, that's looking at, we are pushing the boundaries of sustainability broader than the building. We're looking at well community, lead communities and so on, and then climate action. And so using the 2030 commitment and the framework and the reporting and the resources has been really key for us to help go from that global scale of the United Nations goals and understand what that means at the building scale and for the work that you know, a lot of our practitioners do, but then also being able to tie that back to the work that our bridge folks are doing or our infrastructure folks and so on. So I will say that 2030 allows us to scale up and down. So the first slide said net zero through the decade, and it's been really interesting to see how the industry's changed way back since 2008, 2009. Many of you know the NREL building, the research support facility for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory over in Golden. I mean, many probably passed it, you either live out there or you've seen it going to the Colorado Mills Mall. So that was the biggest and largest net zero energy building at the time. Still to this day, fast forward 10, 12 years, it's still operating at net zero energy, net positive, and it just became, I think, the 4th building in the world to achieve the LEED Zero certification. When that came out last year, we applied for that and were successful. So if anybody has any questions about LEED Zero, I'm happy to chat offline about that. Next slide, please. And as you know, accompanying the building is also the parking garage, and really the whole campus has been operating on net positive for many, many years. Next slide, please. And then when I talked about through the decade, we've got a number of net zero projects in our portfolio right now, and looking at how that's the design and the technologies have changed. You probably know the Denver Water Admin Building that achieved net zero. We were not allowed to give presentations on it just yet, hopefully soon. So here's another project which you'll see as you're driving down I-25 is the CDOT headquarters. If you've noticed the bright orange wall, coincidentally, orange is a Stantec color, but it was the client chose that, and the color was chosen before we got acquired, and then we got acquired and we realized, well, just as well it was orange. So this has rooftop solar, which you're probably not able to see from the road, LEED Gold facility, and this was an example of a client that achieved a beautiful LEED Gold high-performing building on a Class B office building budget because it's for a public entity, and wanted to be very, very responsible with the funds that we had. So this was also driven by a lot of education, a lot of talking to the client about the goals and working with them. So 2030 commitment was really a good mechanism for getting this building delivered as well. And I think that was the end of, yeah, there we go.
Well, Mike, if there's any questions, and we'll try and give you answers.
Fantastic. That's everybody take a deep breath. That's a lot of good stuff. And thanks for sharing it. We did have a couple questions, and I'll get to those. So the first one was more of a, how can we learn more? So as with all these presentations, we will make it available online afterwards. So if you'd like to review a recording, if things came at you too fast and you want to go back and maybe look at one of those slides and hear the context for it, you'll be able to do that as well. And then we'll have the PowerPoint available also. So if you're on the call, you'll get first dibs on those. And then a question from the attendees was, can you recommend any good templates or examples of sustainability action plans for a firm?
We used to have.
Yeah, luckily.
Go ahead, Heather.
Sorry, Nate and I were both eager to answer that one. So they are actually, once you become a signatory, or actually, and I think they're publicly available, you can go to the AIA 2030 commitment website and see the sustainability action plans for firms that have already signed on. So I know for many firms, that's a pretty useful tool. You can look at firms that you kind of consider peers or role models, and you can look at their sustainability action plan and see kind of what format works best for you. I think Nate was about to say this. They used to be pretty prominently displayed on the website. So what I'm going to try to do is find the link and post it on the chat right now. If I can't find it in the next 3 minutes, though, I'll share it with our hosts so that they can share that out, because it is a little bit buried on the website now.
Yes, Heather and I have been on the committee for a long time together. She's very telepathic. We both are. So yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is I don't remember if that's still up or not, but hopefully they are. They were great. I mean, you could just cherry pick what you wanted. So and just see what they're up to. And it's funny in my mind to see like the really high-end firms like you guys, you know, got the great covers and everything. You do not need to do that. You can just type out something. It works fine, but whatever works for you.
Another attendee question, when you're completing the design data exchange reports, does the architect do that, or do they interface with consultants and send them a template or a guide to provide that information?
So usually the architect does it, but it doesn't matter. Like if you want to be, if you're an engineer, a mechanical engineer, let's say, you can sign on to the 2030 commitment. If you're a structural engineer, you can. We have a few of those. It does not matter if the project gets double counted. I think moving forward, we're going to try and not have that happen, that it's more like sharing it. Heather, do you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a transition moment for that. In the past, it's been really focused on architectural firms, because we really wanted to demonstrate that we have so much control and influence over the energy use of our buildings. But I think now, as we are starting to reach, I think, a somewhat critical mass in the architectural profession, and we're getting so much interest from energy modeling firms and NEP consultants, I think there's now an openness to having those firms join the discussion. The fear previously is that if we thought of this as being an engineer's problem, architects would never pivot to really, kind of taking control and feeling like they had some influence over this.
Yeah, it goes back to what Heather was talking about, energy literacy. I mean, at the end of the day, as Nate said, it doesn't matter what your report looks like. It doesn't matter who's collecting the information, as long as everybody on the team increases their energy literacy, increases their intuition about what type of glass and where to put it and what type of wall systems. And at the end of the day, as long as we have less carbon emissions in the air to show for it, that's really what matters. So bring as many people as you can into the conversation if it's going to help spur action.
Is the user interface on DDX changing in their new rollout?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, and that will be, it's changing quite significantly for the better. It's a lot more user-friendly. It really does help walk through the process of a project and the information that you need. And it also accurately reflects the information that the profession has evolved to understand is critical to the performance of a project. And some of the information that was not as relevant is no longer required. And it will be released, I think, in the next month or so. Again, just like everything else in the world, plans were put on shelf for a little bit due to coronavirus, but we've seen the beta version, and it's something that it's going to be really exciting when it's released.
I know there's a lot of energy modeling tools out there, and some of them are more geared toward the program end of the project, and others are more geared toward the back end and commissioning. But what modeling tools have you found to be most appropriate and usable?
So I was brought on to the 2030 commitment long ago during the 2008 recession, and it was to try and figure out how to take out barriers to smaller firms. And I found a free program called HEED, H-E-E-D, from UCLA. If you just do a Google search, you'll find it. Pretty impressive little program for being free. And I mean, if you're doing single family or even multifamily, relatively small, and a little bit of light commercial, it works. I mean, it works. I would not, we've transitioned over to Sapphira, but nothing wrong with using that little program. So, programs can be expensive for small firms. That can be an impediment. So those are the two that I have experience with.
Yeah, I feel like we use a lot of different tools, and it sometimes seems like we have one that's in favor for a few years and then we'll switch to another, just because I think that there's some really new and exciting things that are coming out. I think Cove Tool is one of the ones that we've experimented most recently, which came out a couple of years ago, and it has some real promise. So my sense has been that it's not the specific tool that matters so much. It's just making sure that you're using something to help. But that being said, I think our preference has been to use eQuest and Grasshopper and its related tools, and all of those are free. The one other thing that I'll say is that when you enter your information into the DDX, it asks you what energy modeling tools you use to get the data that you came up with, and that's all available on the DDX. So I think in some of the 2030 annual reports, it's actually shown what firms are the percentage of firms that are using different tools. So that would be a great way to kind of see which ones are most popular with signatory firms.
Mm-hmm. So one thing we've had a request for is to do a deeper dive on that energy modeling aspect of measurements. So don't be at all surprised for anyone on this call if we roll out one of those as one of these future virtual connects. I think there's a lot of interest in that. And we may even come back to the same panelists to help us walk through some of those. So
yeah, stunningly easier to model than like that hand drawn, that hand done. That's what I did back in Boulder. That's what we did back in the day. And so when people go, oh, it's so hard, I'm like, oh man, please, it's nothing like it used to be. You drag a little window and you instantly know what impact that has. So it's really great now.
Mm-hmm. Well, one more question to wrap up with, but before we get to that question, actually, I'll tell the panelists what the question is so you can think about it while I make my announcement. I know, Nate, when we've talked, and I've had the good fortune to be able to see your firm's great work over a number of years back in Illinois, but you often raise the concept of propelling the bell. It's not about, it's about meeting people where they are in the profession as designers, but also clients, and just moving it forward wherever you are. So I'd like to hear thoughts from the panel on that. So whether you're an early adopter or someone who's just coming around to this, how to embrace that concept, both internally, personally, professionally, and with your clients. So that's what we'll end with. But before we get to that, I do want to make a couple announcements. To receive your HSW credit for today's session, we would like you to put your full name in the chat function. So just enter your name in the chat function. And again, a reminder to double check that your RSVP was recorded for today via the calendar event link. And a reminder again, our awards submission session to demystify how our awards are working will be Friday at noon. And I think a big topic of that call will be our new sustainability award criteria, which uses those design excellence standards that the code has come up with. And then next week, we have sessions lined up for how local governments are changing and adapting their processes for permitting inspections. Obviously, they are affected by this COVID-19 environment as well. You can find all those events that we have queued up for the next few weeks on our calendar on the website. And then one final note that I want to say, a big shout out to our sustainability working group. This is one that the board formed this year in 2020, and we've got folks from all over the state who are helping guide the future direction of AIA Colorado on our sustainability and resilience initiatives. And the board of directors in their strategic planning this year made environmental stewardship one of our 3 imperatives going forward in our strategic plan. So we've got work to do, and we are committed to advancing the ball on that. And your local numbers, just for anybody who's interested, we have 35 design firms in Colorado who are signatory firms to the 2030 commitment. 4 of them are new in 2020, so we've had some recent growth on that. 19 of those firms have reported projects. 19 have reported projects, a total number of 84 projects in all. We can do better. It's our objective to do better. In fact, we would like to double these numbers over the next year. So to close out, back to that question about propelling the ball and propelling the bell and moving forward.
Well, I mean, I can just say that, you know, the AIA has been very focused on that. And what that is, you know, the bell-shaped curve, the front end of that is high performance firms. And the committees we're on, it's like everyone's a high performance firm. And we all think somewhat similar. And it's good to step out of that and go, okay, we've got all those firms already signed on. We want to get the middle of that bell where most every firm is. The firms that don't have this at the top of their mind all the time, we want to bring it so that they do start thinking that way. There's, you know, that's the way we're going to get many, many more signatories, much more square footage, et cetera. So it's not always about, you know, dangling the design awards thing in front of firms. There's firms that don't apply for design awards. That's perfectly fine, but we should get them on board too. And then at the tail end of that are codes to kind of move everyone forward.
I'll just say that I think what's really important about this program is that it's about your entire portfolio of projects, your entire practice. It's not about just highlighting the superstars. So to me, that's what makes this program really stand out from LEED and other certification systems that we're all familiar with as a measure for sustainability and building performance. So I've really rallied around this program as being the single most impactful thing that my firm can engage in, because it really looks at every aspect of our day-to-day practice.
Yeah, so Nate and Heather captured it very well. And so I think I'll go a little bit off the deep end here and say that this is one of the best programs for tracking and reducing the energy use and associated carbon emissions with your projects. And we've all seen that this is not just about a building's energy use. This is about the air we're breathing. It's about, you know, whether pandemics occur again. It's about hurricanes getting worse. And I think sustainability is often seen as a luxury, but it's a human right. And if, as architects, we have this professional and moral responsibility, because we have the superpower. We can do something about the biggest chunk of carbon emissions that are emitted by society. And so use the 2030 commitment. There's so many resources. It's a great framework. There's really no excuse. It's right there. There's a lot of work has gone into answering the questions that architects have, providing the exact level of support that architects will have. So let's all use the program together and really bring down the impact that we're having collectively as a profession.
Well, Nate, Rachel, and Heather, thank you so much for sharing your insight and expertise. We're all better for having taken this time today to learn from you. And we wish you well. And we say, be safe and stay well to the rest of our attendees today. And we'll see you soon in the virtual space. Thank you.
Thank you so much.